Welcome to Get Serious, where at Serious Land Capital, we have successfully funded over $6.5 million worth of land deals with industry-leading 41% operating margins. So today I wanted to go over some updated market thoughts as it relates to real estate primarily, and relate it back to some updated thinking and some mental models from a recent book that I didn't fully read, but I utilized my learning accelerator skill within Claude to kind of orient all the key points that relate to my own professional and personal goals. So just plugging that in there, pretty much any nonfiction content runs through that filter, so I can stay firmly focused on what I need to actually apply within my business. So just throwing that out there. I believe I've talked a bit about that before. Otherwise, I can dive more into the mechanics. But nevertheless, this one book that I was, consuming the content and applying it even more specifically is called The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles C. Mann. It came out a little less than 10 years ago. Core thesis of this book is that there are wizards who, in this case, for much of this book, it was represented by this Norman Borlaug, father of the Green Revolution. I've heard a couple podcasts about him. You can look him up a bit more. There's quotes that says, he saved a billion lives on the planet. He won the Nobel Peace Prize and did a whole bunch of work related to wheat engineering to just make wheat much more hardy within different environments. And, that just allowed a lot more people to be fed over much of the 1900s and still now, supplying a whole bunch more calories. But his whole viewpoint and mindset was more around like innovation is breaking through any apparent limits, just like keep pushing, grow more, engineer more. Ceiling is not real. I'm generally going to be more within that type of mindset, especially as it relates to technology. And then the profit viewpoint, this was represented by William Vogt. Might be mispronouncing that, VOGT. He was this founder of modern carrying capacity thinking that is more oriented towards limits being real, and the durable move is to consume less and live within them a lot more. Again, these guys were kind of focused from an agricultural perspective, so a lot more just sustainable environmentalism was William Vogt's core focus. So again, these are separated from more like the hard charging innovation works and can push past any limit, called the wizards, and then the prophets are more like the respecting kind of the natural way of things and trying to live within what we might say, quote unquote, natural laws are. So that's the framework to keep in mind as I relate it back to current market conditions, how I'm thinking about a lot of things. So jumping now to the real estate side of things, again, I think all of us try to pay as much attention to macro and what our businesses are telling us. And I don't know anybody out there. I think it's like pretty much a given that people are considering this to be a challenging environment for real estate in most parts of the U.S. at least. Not all, but most, especially if you look at countrywide data and different sections of the U.S., especially the South and the West. There's definitely more buyers markets than there are sellers markets here. Again, we've commented on this a number of times, but taking a look even more so where we're at, I have both felt within our business like just a continued disconnect on even assets that I thought were going to perform well and we had enough downside protection. Like even those ones are just moving even slower than anticipated. And, our initial underwriting just started to, falter more than expected. Again, this could probably be its own podcast here, but, we had bought this property in Texas that, was bought at right around $3,000 per acre, inclusive of some value add that we did. And all the underwriting that we had seen in much of Q1 of this year, it's like some title issues, it took a while to close on this thing, pointed towards moving it at pretty reliably between 5,500 to 6,000 per acre. And that would have been a even more conservative approach. Like I felt good about even listing it at 7,000 per acre, given some of the characteristics of this property and other comparable properties moving around that price. And we've had to cut steadily down. Right now we're at 5,000 per acre here and still like barely any hits. Like we might actually get an offer on it shortly, but it's been super slow. And even the realtors like, yeah, things have just really collapsed more recently here. And some other thoughts of like, yeah, people are maybe looking for hunting land closer to late August, September. And this is not like, it's kind of hunting land, but it could serve residential, or there's a lot of people on vacation. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily like burn an entire summer waiting around for people potentially being on vacation for that long of a period of time. Like to me, that's a little bit of a weak rationale behind it. So like again, price will solve 95+% of any problem you have with property. But I was just surprised how much we had to keep cutting to even start to find our market. And I went back and recomped everything out. And again, the change was so dramatic. Like usually land and oftentimes real estate in general, like does not move that fast. Like a couple of months should not like dramatically change anticipated exit prices by like 20, 30+%. Like that's a really fast moving market. But when I re-looked at the comps, and it had just slowed down a lot more since we had purchased it and listed it on market, and like more reliably. Like if I was just fresh underwriting this property before we had, if it came across our desk, like again earlier this year, I was forecasting like 5,500, 6,000 per acre to feel, comfortable where we actually pull the trigger, again, given how conservative we are. But in this case, I would have underwritten this like closer to 4,000 per acre. So again, like really dramatic change here. And it's like, yeah, this is just, it's a tough environment to work in. And I know, again, hyper local real estate, et cetera. But, you can pay attention to a lot of the other macro indicators, or again, like I'll follow the reventure data and so forth, and like there are a lot of folks like losing their shirt for real in the real estate industry, or even just whether they're investor owners or just owners of homes, especially folks who have bought more recently when interest rates have crept up a bit more, like taking 100K plus losses on homes that they might have bought within the last 4 or 5 years or less, just because of how dramatic the real estate market has worsened in a lot of locations around the US. And I just, even though we've been in like pretty much a bottom and like a plateaued buyer's market for the past 4 years, like it feels like things have still continued to bottom out even more. And I'm not sure where it's actually going to end. So like my conservatism is just even higher than it already had been. And like pulling the trigger on, virtually any property, I value liquidity even more so when it comes to dealing with a market like this. Which is like, what does it take to even get us off the sidelines here when all the data that we're looking at, even if we're right on the initial underwriting, if things are like can shift so dramatically downward right at that purchase point or right after we start to list, like that's so hard to predict. I mean, you can have some future indicators like from the reventure data and so forth, but like predicting 20 to 30% decrease in prices over like the next 2 months after you buy something, it's really hard to find any data that'll show you such a dramatic drop there. But nevertheless, like that's what's happening in real time as we're dealing with that. Like again, exceptionally difficult to deal with circumstances that are that fast moving in a traditionally more stable industry to work in. So noting all of that, and again, like I could spend a whole bunch more time just on how we're going to reorient capital allocation and so forth here. But going back to what I prefaced at the start and kind of introed you to, like this wizard and profit mentality here. And like as I was going through, my own thoughts, and like again, Claude has all the context on how I think and relevant business and personal context and so forth, and like it realistically pointed out, realistically and I mean accurately pointed out, hey, like you are much more of a wizard when it comes to like AI and technology, which is very true. Like I'm just, again, couldn't be more pro as far as how transformative this technology is. Like limits are almost meaningless as this tech continues to improve here. Whereas it was like, hey, you're more of that profit mentality of, hey, be, much more conservative and kind of keep additional options on the table when it comes to underwriting real estate. So it's entirely possible within different realms of your life. Again, the nuance is everything, right? To, be a wizard in one dimension and a prophet in others. And how do you kind of balance your decision making when it comes to that? Now, the key factor here and kind of like the punchline of this whole book is like, okay, what's you would think what's better, to be a wizard or a prophet here? And when you look through the data on a whole bunch of various examples, I know it's kind of like represented by these two guys within the ag field, is that there's no clear cut outcome as it relates to which worldview is generally better. Like where it kind of sorts out is that when you do have room for innovation, like in this case, like AI and so forth, too, like, yeah, try to be a wizard. And if there are great gains to be made, like take it. Like don't be afraid to take the win. And that's what we're trying to do now. But just be mindful that there's almost inevitably going to be long tail or second order effects that prophets might be more aware of that are going to come at the expense of pursuing, innovation and wizard oriented goals, potentially at all costs here. So like from the AI side, we've named a whole bunch of those. I mean, like these loneliness epidemic and AI slop all over the place. And, people being less capable from like a critical thinking perspective. Those are just a handful, right? Potentially like massive job displacement, like all those are major pieces, but it's like, okay, do we are we mindful of those while we're trying to take the win of the productivity gains that we can get from AI in the first place? Or another one, it can be like a lot of controversy thrown into it, but there's at least theorized and, some evidence, I would even say like, stronger evidence if you look into it. Like we think back to the COVID pandemic, people had kind of settled on, okay, this was a, spontaneous mutation and disease that kind of crept all over the world. But there's a reasonable theory that suggests that it was gain of function research that unfortunately kind of broke past guardrails that these scientists had in place, and then led to this COVID pandemic. And if you really want to like get spicier there, it's like, okay, which countries were behind this? Is there U.S. involvement, Chinese, both, whatever? Like again, the whole point of this is not really to settle in on, hey, this is exactly what happened. It's more the approach to kind of keep in mind here, whereas like a wizard type approach of like, okay, let's go into this gain of function research. We can potentially solve a whole bunch of diseases and so forth. But the second order effect of, hey, what happens if something breaks past our guardrails and we unleash this pretty terrible disease that brought the world to its knees for a few years there, when everything's considered, and we're like still dealing with after effects of COVID, even all these years later. But even if you throw out COVID in and of itself, like let's just consider a world where COVID didn't happen. If you went through that gain of function research, like we could still consider that from a wizard perspective of, pursuing growth and innovation at all costs, and still consider, okay, here's the second order effects that a prophet would be worried about. And people had been worried about this even like much, pre-COVID and so forth on, what can happen. There's like a lot of nasty effects, whether it could be biological terrorism or, accidentally changing the human genome and shifting our species in a unexpected direction, something like that. So people had these thoughts in mind. It's just like we actually saw this play out in real time. Again, whether that actually happened or not is besides the point. What serves is that this is like an analogy on how to think about, again, wizard versus prophet here. So you can see that in like one domain, and also, again, within your own life here, you can be a wizard or more pro-wizard in a certain domain, and more of a prophet in others. And just having to be aware there are trade-offs to both. Like, again, there's not a clear-cut, wizard is always going to work, prophet's always going to work. There's always a balance between the two, and just understanding how to hold both of those mindsets and where you might be focused on one, so you can orient your decision making accordingly. And one key piece from all the various research is that regardless of whether you're coming from a wizard or a prophet mentality, is that a ton of people would try to do various forecasts. And when it came to making, some of these grand predictions, like, there was, this population bomb perspective. This is like in the 1970s, roughly, and thinking, yeah, the population is going to grow so much, it's going to outstrip our ability to produce food and everything. Didn't actually happen because we were able to keep up innovation to still feed the planet. Or, peak oil. Hey, the world's going to run out of oil here. No, like the U.S. turned into a net exporter of oil roughly 15 years ago through the shale evolution. So that's another example. There's a handful of others. So like when you really, a lot of those like doom and gloom or just, collapse level forecasts, which is something that gets thrown around now. Like, I mean, from the AI side, it's like, oh man, is every single job going to be displaced? Like we don't know what's going to happen there. Or, some folks that might say, again, also from the AI side, but more the hardware, like look at this global supply chain. And there are certainly a lot of issues, especially with this, geopolitical instability. But it's like, okay, take one of these, supply chains offline, and all of a sudden, like AI is just going to disappear for like the next 10 to 30 years. Like, are we really going to bet on something like that compared to potentially a gentler approach, or enough momentum that humans have developed in this certain arena that they will find a way to work it out versus just going backwards for decades to come? Like that's so hard for me to even consider here. So that's why I'm just more mindful of like these collapse level dynamics, or even like look at, how many people are predicting, recessions or depressions and what have you. And, even like the multi-billionaires like Ray Dalio, I mean, he's been saying for years and years and years, like this, 75-year debt cycle, things are going to collapse over time. But, he's also been saying that for, I know at least 10 plus years, maybe 20 years, something like that. So, not to say that it doesn't have some rationale behind it, but when you make these larger collapse level forecasts, they tend to be less accurate when you keep that in mind. So like I have to be mindful too of where, yeah, you feel a lot of trepidation in the real estate market. It's like, yeah, is this going to bottom out even more? How much is this going to collapse? But just being aware that that type of mindset where you might be forecasting this, just, is it going to collapse due to interest rates or continued inflation or displacement from AI and so forth, is probably going to be less likely. Just looking at the data across a whole bunch of other, collapse forecasts that were predicted in the past. So I can still be a prophet when it comes to conservative underwriting and just being very cautious about, capital allocation and so forth. But also being mindful that I still have to be open to opportunity that might still come up, and not just getting stuck within, hey, everything's just collapsing, I'm going to paralyze myself from not taking action on any possible opportunity. So you have to know how to balance that correctly. Whereas again, like there are other forecasts though that can perform well. Like for example, like climate change that was, predicted extremely well here. That would be more in the favor of like, the profits instead of like, heading towards environmental stability and so forth here. But, heavily based in science, it's the evidence has been pretty overwhelming from that perspective, or like, exponential capability, Moore's law, Wright's law, and Swanson's laws as it relates to solar and battery cost declines. Like those have been very predictable as well too. So, there are some forecasts that can perform better, but more of the tell here, like when you're going to be making forecasts, is that much the losers kind of share just, a single dominant mechanism. Again, like from population side, like human population across the whole world is going to lead to total collapse of civilization, et cetera. Like it's too many variables and confounders to be more reliable there, and kind of extrapolating a current trend to a full catastrophe. Again, you could look at that from the real estate market. Assumption that human behavior stays static. Like this is the thing that I center in so often. It's like humans are constantly evolving and constantly adapting to the situations around them. I mean, we saw that again, like with COVID there, to bring that up again. During the early stages, it was like, no vaccine has ever been created in, less than 5 years, something like that. I don't know. I'd have to go back to that. And we were able to, through enough resources to get these mRNA vaccines out. I know there's like some thoughts, hey, no, this was actually more negative. I think if you look at the science for most people taking the vaccine, it was more of a positive in terms of the overall health of the population, with some negative factors that should have been portrayed more carefully. But again, things were moving fast. It was a difficult environment to work in. So, but that nevertheless just serves as an example that, like, yeah, humans, if we're pressed against certain constraints and pressures to act, you can't necessarily predict that, even if you look at thousands of years of human history, because you have to take into account the ability to adapt and change the environment accordingly. And especially like having a confident near-term date, and like that it's just hard to do, especially in, again, this world of AI. Like, I would say I love being futuristic, like looking 5, 10+ years out. I would say like anything even beyond a year is really, really difficult to kind of ascertain or even put a stamp on. Like, it's just so fluid at the moment. Whereas, on the flip side, for forecasts, winning forecasts tend to share, it's more of a bounded scope, like really laying out, hey, this variable will lead to this variable. Oftentimes it'll be more like scientific, not, necessarily going to get as much attention and so forth, but that's the route to accuracy. Or like a very stable physical mechanism, like, from a demographic side of things, like there is population momentum. Like, it's easier to predict population projections over the next at least 20, 40 years, because most of these people had already been born, and we have idea of fertility rates and so forth. So or like manufacturing learning curves, like that's a very stable mechanism. We can develop like years worth of data, Moore's law, etc., that you can reliably predict. But also just being humble about the timing again too. It's like, yeah, this could happen a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years potentially. So just keeping that in mind as far as how you might forecast with some more accuracy there. Or like another one too, and I would love this to be the case. Like, we'll kind of start wrapping this up now, but like even like Ray Kurzweil, more famous kind of futurist, AI expert as well too. We see a lot of this. There's going to be like nanobots living in our body within the next 10 years, and like all of human disease will go away, and we'll basically be able to live forever. And it's like, okay, theoretically, that's possible. I would love that to be the case. Like, if you could give me like almost any wish, I think that would be maybe my number one for humanity here. I think that would be at the top of most people's lists. But when you look at the profit perspective of like, okay, what's actually realistic to happen? Like, would I throw away any sustainable health related mechanisms like exercising and eating properly and sleeping properly, because I'm just so gung-ho about this potential immortality that's going to come over the next 10 years? No, I would think that's a very bad bet. So that's why it's like, okay, yeah, you can have the bullishness plugging away and hoping or investing in this potential for wizard oriented immortality technology that can come along the way, or at least like significantly health increasing technology, while still being a profit and taking care of your body in case that doesn't happen, so you can still live a more sustainable life given our current mortal constraints, so to speak. So that's just another analogy to throw that back in. So to summarize here, real estate market, tough spot right now. Very tough. Again, even with all of our experience, our conservatism, markets might be moving faster than we've ever seen them in a downward trending correction. So we were even tighter on liquidity than ever before. But we're balancing that conservatism against being mindful of a wizard versus a profit mentality. Again, wizard, you're going to be more oriented towards innovation, growth at all costs. That will push past any ceiling. Profit, hey, let's be careful. There's going to be second order effects that could potentially be extremely damaging, or eliminate any of the gains that the wizard innovation might get quicker, in understanding that we can hold wizard mentalities in some areas of your life and profit mentalities as more dominant mechanisms in other parts of your life. But there's always a balance between them. And the key thing is to take the win when it's in your hands from a wizard perspective, but be mindful and try to protect against the second order effects that wizard related growth can contribute to. from a profit perspective and try to mitigate as much as possible, whether they are potentially known risks or unknown risks. So how do you prevent that accordingly? And again, in our side, like AI technology, hey, we're really wizard oriented. At least I am personally. Whereas from the profit side, yeah, like the way we underwrite real estate is much more profit oriented. And, just wanting to keep options open, very sustainable business and monetary practices here. So hopefully this one was interesting to you and gives you another mental model on how to assess your own business and life in general here. I thought this was a really fascinating read. Again, I think I got more out of it by running it through my Learning Accelerator quad skill than I would have just reading the book. It would have taken me forever to do this anyway, with the newborn at home, 600 pages and so forth. Instead, I can just fly through it within a day and share my learnings with you on this podcast here and soon to be newsletter. So tell me, this is probably a wizard type thinking, right? But what's at the cost of it? I don't know. Second order effects, maybe it's going to fade out of my mind more. Who knows? But just to give you another example on how we might balance out those ways of thinking. So again, if you ever have deals to send over, seriousland.capital, be on the lookout for our SLC chat cowork plugin. Ton more progress on that recently. Feel free to DM me if you want to be on our priority list for the launch here. It's a white glove boutique install, and subscribe and share, everybody. Looking forward to next time. Bye.